Okay, welcome to the NSP Closeout office hours. Just as a reminder, all the previous presentations and webinars has been posted out to the NSP or out to HUD Exchange on the NSP site. The webinar materials, including the session recordings, transcripts will be posted to the HUD Exchange within the next 7 to 14 days. So please check back for accessing that information. Today, I am joined by Stan Bitterman with Urban Ventures and Duncan Yetman with the HUD Office of Block Grant Assistance. Just want to reference back to the NSP Closeout series. We are on the final office hours of the NSP Closeout series. The series covered key considerations of the best use of program income, disposition of land banks, and the NSP Closeout requirements. The NSP Closeout series, just to show you the dates and times that those sessions were held. As mentioned earlier, the PowerPoint, transcripts, recordings, everything will be posted out to the HUD website in the next within the next 14 business days. Okay, and with that, we are going to go ahead and go into the Q&A portion of this office hours, and I am going to get us to the right slide here. And I'm going to go ahead and remind all the participants to go ahead and submit their questions into the Q&A box. If you can't find the Q&A box, it is located within the lower right-hand corner. You might see 3 dots. Clicking on that, and that is where you're going to be able to access the Q&A box and enter your questions. Okay, before heading there, I do want to go ahead and show you, for those who may be new to NSP program, information, tools and resources is available on the HUD Exchange website. So if you go to hudexchange.info, and then within the search bar, type in NSP and click on the search. And the very first recommendation will bring you to the NSP program page. There has information on NSP Closeout, the policy guidance, grantee data and reports, and DRGR, along with resources on NSP basics, implementation, closeout, and trainings. I also want you to view the guide under NSP Closeout. This will bring you to the NSP Closeout process and guidance website, where it will walk you through step by step on preparing for closeout, completing the closeout, and complying with closeout requirements. And this is a great tools and resources for helping you answer all of your questions and preparing for closeout, along with a list of resources. You can skip forward by clicking on the left-hand side for a topic of your choice, such as has a 25% set-aside requirement for the grant amount have been met. Just wanted to share that great resource with everyone prior to us getting into the questions and answer portion of this closeout hours. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump in and ask some questions that we had from our webinar series on Tuesday. So, Duncan, I'm going to go ahead and throw this first one out to you.
Okay.
The question covered or inquired about the remnant property that is not properly land banked.
Mhm.
Do you want to go ahead and discuss or
Yeah.
explain
Yeah.
this a little bit further?
Yeah. So, um, right. So what I explained on Tuesday is that we have grantees that believe, um, for one reason or another, that they have a land bank active because they have these quote remnant unquote properties that that have been hard to develop. They've been in their inventory for a long time, maybe since the inception of the program, and they don't know, how to do what to do with these properties or how to develop them. Um, and I mentioned on Tuesday as well that HUD has sometimes referred to these properties or groups of these properties as informal land banks, although we don't necessarily regard them as land banks and having to meet the requirements of land banks as set forth in the NSP statutes and notices. So with regard to these properties, you would follow the in terms of disposition, you would follow um, uh, the requirements for NSP with regard to their disposition and or the CDBG program with regard to changing use provisions within the CDBG regulations. Um, those differ for subrecipients versus grantees. So grantees need to be mindful of that. But that's basically how you would, move forward on those particular, with regard to disposition of those particular properties.
Great, thank you for.
It's likely they haven't met a national objective,
Right.
right? So they would need to do that before then.
And
Close out.
if they will never meet a national objective, then whatever investment of NSP dollars that the grantee put into them, that's the amount that they will have to repay prior or at closeout. Yeah.
And that is a big problem. I'm sure grantees do not want to pay back any money that they have expended on any of the properties within their portfolio.
Yeah.
I think with some of my experience with grantees is some have had the staff turnover and not realizing that they still have these properties on the book. So hopefully as we move through closeout, they'll be able to realize this and hopefully they're not undevelopable land, but instead just ones that have fallen through the cracks.
And you bring up a good point there, Stan. Considering I'm assuming that most of the grantees are newer staff to NSP, how would you suggest determining what properties or, how to track down what may be in your portfolio?
Well, and we kind of touched on this on Tuesday. Certainly one is through DRGR, seeing what's owned. Second one would be to look at, if it's owned, if we're talking about these properties that are kind of the leftover properties that are outside a land bank, most cities and counties that I've worked with have a real estate owned department. And so check with them and see what properties might be, what properties are owned, especially if they're in DRGR, check and see if they're still owned by the city or county, by the grantee. And then with the land bank, one possibility is also to look at your property assessor's records and see what properties are owned by the land bank authorities and see if they match up with what's in DRGR. And then I think the final one that we didn't talk about is the most obvious is ask the land bank for a list of what they own that was bought with NSP.
All great suggestions. Okay. Now on to the next question that we had. We are considering donating land bank properties to third parties to redevelop as affordable housing for low to mod income households. So at what point is disposition considered over for the purposes of NSP? So I think really probably the clarification that we provided the other day is really, you know, if there's funding associated with a property, the point that the program is over is really after the period of affordability or the continued affordability period.
Yeah.
Do you, Duncan
You're
or
not,
Stan, do you got any more to
you're
add?
not divesting of these properties entirely because there was still NSP dollars that assisted these properties in terms of your purchase of them, right? At some point, they're in your inventory, they're land banked, you purchased them, or, you know, they became part of your land bank. And, so, you know, that disposition is not considered over until the end of the affordability period, right? And so those properties still need to be tracked as being compliant with the affordability requirements through the end of that period.
And so the affordability period, in most cases, that's 15 years. But is that correct, Duncan, that, you know, some grantees opted for longer? And so if so, how would they determine?
Well, you know, that affordability period is probably going to be a land use restriction that runs with the deed and runs with whatever is recorded in the land records for that for that jurisdiction. You know, whether that's in City Hall or the county tax assessor's office or wherever those land records are kept. You want to reference what is the land use restriction that was placed on the property at the time that it was, you know, acquired and then developed. You know, in this case, you've acquired properties as part of a land bank. You're going to dispose of them, and I think you know, given the level of disposition and the amount of dollars invested, that you really should follow the safe harbor that we've provided through the home program resale and recapture provisions as to how many years that affordability period ought to be. And let me see if I got those handy here. Yeah, I think actually I do have my home program recs here. So let me see if I can just look at it real quickly. Yeah, so under $15,000 of assistance, the minimum period of affordability would be 5 years. I'm assuming that very well may be the case, you know, for the person who posed this question. So you can do an affordability period of 5 years, and that would be fine. Yeah, under 15,000 is 5 years, 15 to 40,000 of NSP dollars invested. That's a 10-year, and over $40,000 is 15 years. So 15 years is the maximum. As far as HUD is concerned, again, as I mentioned on Tuesday, we've seen grantees with as affordability periods, you know, going out to 2060, 2075. Yeah.
And that's a
You know, the
lot of
advocate side of
annual
me,
reporting.
yeah, the advocate side of me likes that long-term affordability. The practical administrator side of me doesn't care for it. Yeah. So there's certainly understand the impetus for wanting to do a longer affordability period, but it does come with a little bit of extra work.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and so the extra work. And that's where the importance of the land management plan and or the management plan for continuing affordability would be beneficial and helpful to the grantees and for future staff and knowing what is needed for the NSP program. Duncan, do you want to cover exactly what the management plan for continuing affordability exactly is?
Well, sure. You know, that again, as we mentioned on Tuesday, it is distinct from the land bank management plan, but the management plan for continuing affordability is essentially you're setting forth using that HUD form 4181 a listing of each property that you assisted with NSP, the start and end date of the NSP affordability period, and the mechanism that's in place to enforce the NSP affordability requirements for each NSP property. And in the event that you know, the property should leave the program, you know, or there be a change in ownership or what have you, you know, what the provision is that the grantee has selected, whether it's resale or recapture, in accordance, you know, as set forth in the home program regulations.
Yeah, and so to follow up the difference with the land management plan actually outlines the authority of the land bank, including contact information, their roles and responsibilities, and the grantee's roles and responsibility, as well for the oversight of those properties. So, and that inventory or that land management plan actually includes an inventory with acquisition dates, their proposed uses, and the national objective along with the projected timeline for disposition. And that plan, and both of those plans are submitted as part of the closeout. Is that correct, Duncan?
Yeah, I mean, but obviously, well before closeout, grantees should have in place a land bank management plan for how they've been operating the land bank right along, right? I mean, it's any tweaks to it can be, you know, performed at closeout. Any updates to it, any revisions, but right along, grantees should be implementing their land bank in accordance with a management plan.
All right, so I'm going to pause there just for a moment. I would like to invite all the participants in today's office hours to submit their questions that they may have on land banks, or feel free to submit questions on any topics regarding to NSP, the closeout, program income. This is your chance to get some intensive, essentially one-on-one attention from some of the best subject matter experts in the NSP field, including Mr. Duncan Yetman. So, being the lead guy there. All right. So, Stan, can NSP programs be closed with land bank properties still existing?
Yes, you've got 10 years from the date of closeout. As long as we're not talking about this informal, we're talking about honest to goodness land bank owned properties. You can close with them in still undeveloped. And in that land bank management plan we've been talking about is where you have a timeline and milestones of how those sites are going to be redeveloped to meet a national objective within the 10 years you have. And we're, you know, encouraging people to monitor their land banks as well, to make sure they're meeting their milestones and that timeline and the milestones that they put in that plan, so you can identify any problems early.
And you know, in that land management plan, should grantees be cognizant about the LH25 requirement?
Yeah, without a doubt, we still have to meet the LH25. So yes, that's something that needs to be in that land bank management plan. And one of the things we touched on Tuesday, was identifying what subsidy you're going to use with the redevelopment. And I think, to me, in the land bank management plan, that's going to be extremely important as well, is to identify how those are going to be developed and what subsidy you're going to use, because more than likely, either it's going to be in a stronger market that is going to be expensive to develop in. There's also an option. There's also a possibility it'll be in a weak market, which means while the development cost may not be higher, the subsidy needed for the potential buyers or renters are going to need to be higher, because we're more than likely in weak markets, we've got very low income people as our target market.
Great. We have a question that has been submitted. Are there land bank specific DRGR reports that you recommend for closeout purposes, or just the same ones as regular activities?
I can try that one, and maybe if Stan has got some more knowledge of the specific reports, he can add to that. So
Doubtful.
I would say that I would point you to the training we did, that's posted to the HUD Exchange, on using your DRGR reports to assist you with closeout. That was a 2-hour-long training webinar that we did last year, that focused on which DRGR reports are going to help you reconcile your activities and get to close out. And then, so in particular, those DRGR reports that are address reports that help you identify the appropriate property addresses. Those are the reports that are going to be most helpful to you with regard to the land banking, at least. So that training, again, that was done last year.
I threw the link in the chat for everyone.
Oh, great.
Yeah, and I'm also sharing it on screen as part of that NSP closeout process and guidance tool that I shared earlier. There is DRGR information page that has notated the MicroStrategy report to the financial report 07B and also report 03B as well.
Yeah, that on the page you're showing, Jamie, that third bullet point, NSP closeout using DRGR reports to prep for closeout webinar. That's the webinar I would point you to for those specific DRGR reports that are peculiar to your land bank activity. Yeah.
And it's very good. It lists the reports, the addresses by activity is the global performance P32, and address supporting data P34. And there's probably the ones for the land bank that would help us figure out what land we own or what land we bought someone else owns.
And another reports that I would probably suggest looking at is your previous quarterly performance reports, which grantees had to list out properties that NSP funds were expended on. So that would be another area to take a look at. And then, I have to stress, grantees should take a look and determine if they're current on all of their quarterly performance reports. And if not, that website that we just had up does provide guidance and instructions for how to get the reports up to date which is all important prior to being able to close out NSP. Okay. Once again, I'm going to encourage everyone participating to submit their questions. We are here to answer anything with NSP. Now, Stan, something just popped in my mind here. There is a requirement on program income and reporting 3 years after closeout that we were discussing earlier prior to this office hours beginning.
Right. So HUD, through their closeout documents, encouraging everyone to meet the LH25 before you close out. But you do have, with program income, you do have 3 years from closeout if you're still going to do something that's going to meet the if you still need to meet the LH25 set aside. So it'd be better if you had everything done by closeout, but you do have a little bit of time after closeout to meet your LH25 set aside. I think for me, life would be much less stressful if I met it by closeout.
Right. All about the stress-free life here. And so the LH25 requirement applies both to the grant funds expended and program income as well.
All program income earned, right? And as prices have continued to go up, it's getting harder to hit those target markets. Or I should say harder. It takes more subsidy to meet those target markets.
Yeah, we talked about subsidies earlier, or kind of briefly mentioned. What are some potential sources of subsidies that grantees can look towards?
Well, I think one, a recent one is the Home Art program as well, which is encouraging folks. Many of us live in communities that have a high incidence of people with homelessness. And the Home Art funds are designed to target qualifying populations, which are, to use shorthand, homeless folks that are at risk of homeless, people fleeing domestic violence, extremely low income renters. And then there's the traditional ones. There's home. If you're doing rehab, you could do some CDBG with that. Use CDBG. We could always work with a LIHTC developer, or a developer of multifamily housing that might be using 9% credits or 4% bonds in order to redevelop the site. So I think those are also possibilities. We're starting to see foundations take a little more interest in affordable housing. Healthcare foundations, insurance companies, Aetna has been involved. HCA has not, but some of the other big United Healthcare has been funding some affordable housing development. So, and then there's always, nonprofits sometimes they'll be able to have capital campaigns to be able to raise funds for a specific project. So, and state or local housing trust funds.
And then I would say one grantees that have the home funding, one potential way to get your NSP land bank properties to move is consider including an incentive of at the time of application for the home funds, including an incentive for proposing using those NSP land bank properties. So, essentially the applicants would get bonus points, I guess you could say, per se, for proposing redeveloping of NSP land bank properties in conjunction with the home funds that they're applying for.
And it seems that could be part of a request for applications, part of the application process as well, is have the sites available and let folks put in a proposal on how to best redevelop them, depending on the size or the size of the lots.
Yeah, and Stan, what are some of the obstacles that grantees could be facing with the properties that are still existing in their land banks?
Well, I'm having just gone through redeveloping a site that was a hotel that we're turning into residential housing. I'm still kind of bitter about everything the zoning department made us do. So zoning issues can be ones that sometimes can be difficult in terms of if you have a slot that's too small. Um, Really what I see where zoning issues may come up is if you have a site that was a valid non-conforming use. So it was built, but it was on a lot that was too small to meet set asides. Or for those of us that are in areas that have very suburban style zoning ordinances, parking requirements can get quite much higher than they were previously. So we might need 2 spaces per unit where it was built originally, it was one. If the use is stopped, which most of these have, then we lose our grandfathering. We're no longer a valid non-conforming use. So we have to redevelop the site to meet all the new codes. And parking is often one of the restrictive sites. I did a deal in outside of Orlando, Florida, where it was by right 83 units. When we had to include all the parking that we needed, it got down to 43 units that we could do. So I think those are some of the challenges with zoning being too small of a lot, not having enough room to put all the parking that was required in. So those are all things that need to be checked out before you put out any kind of application or request for people to redevelop the site you own.
Okay, checking the Q&A box, and we are still waiting for questions to be submitted. We are here to be of your assistance, and so we will go ahead and pause and wait and see about if any more questions come in.
Jamie, I just want to reiterate that, we can answer questions about any aspect of closeout in this session. It doesn't have to be just about land bank.
Yeah, I'm sure there's several questions on people's minds, possibly around program income and the options that grantees may have with program income and facilitating closeout. I will go ahead and take the time to cover technical assistance. HUD grantees can request on-call technical assistance from HUD. Grantees are encouraged to contact their CPD rep to discuss the option of submitting the technical assistance request. Once the CPD office is on board, grantees can submit their request on the request assistance or request a program assistance page on the HUD Exchange. Also, in the coming weeks, HUD will be releasing a new guidance on land bank closeouts. I do want to make all the grantees aware of that forthcoming guidance, which will help grantees take in considerations options and for disposition, as well as the requirements for closeout of the NSP program. And just a reminder, today is the office hours for the last office hours that is being held for the NSP Closeout series. You'll be able to view all the Closeout series trainings and materials on the HUD Exchange. All the materials will be posted to the HUD Exchange within the next 14 business days. So keep an eye out for that, as these webinar series and office hours were very informative on questions related to NSP.
Hey, Jamie, it looks like we have a few questions in the chat box instead of the Q&A.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah, and as a reminder for everyone to submit their questions within the Q&A box. Let's see. Can you briefly go over program income conversion to CDBG? Yes. So let me go over that. So actually, I will demonstrate for you all. Get to the right page. I thought I was sharing. Here we go. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the NSP closeout process and guidance. And we'll go ahead and click on prepare. Are you ready for closeout? So this whole section under prepare covers line of credit, 25% set aside, or the LH25 that we've discussed multiple times. And then there's program income. So we're going to take a look and go through the pages here. And there is a link here, NSP program transfer instructions and forms. So if you were to click on that document, it would bring you to the resource. All the information posted there. And there is another spot about program income earned prior to closeout. And this NSP program income guide is a new document that HUD has released, which provides all of the key considerations and guidance for grantees to think about with closing out their program.
Yeah.
Let's see about making this bigger for everyone.
Yeah, while Jamie's working on that, I also want to reiterate that program income conversion to your CDBG program or transfer to your CDBG program, you don't need to wait until you're ready for closeout. You may have a need for that program income right now in your CDBG program, but you're not ready to close out your NSP program. That's okay. You can begin transfer of program income at any time in the process, whether or not you are ready for closeout.
And that's a good point. But also on the other end of that, grantees will need to take in consideration at the time of closing or at the time of transferring the program income funds to CDBG, will that affect their timeliness? So you need to keep that in the back of your mind too when considering transferring program income to CDBG. So yeah, so this is a great guide for grantees. The program and decisions, you're going to have to consider ramp up overall spending, draw remaining funds if that's needed, keeping the remaining funds after closeout, or transferring program income to CDBG. So it's a great document. with resources such as the 2014 Closeout Guide, steps on transferring program income to CDBG entitlement, along with references to the IDIS manual, as funds are being transferred from DRGR to IDIS, two different separate financial databases. And then here's the program income tracker that grantees can use, and receiving program income as well. And then finally, the last page has an income checklist, program income checklist, which are bucketed by administrative task, accounting, and compliance. So very helpful information and resource out there. So hopefully that was beneficial to all. Okay. Taking a look in the chat box again. All right, so what is a good report to get for committed and unobligated for locks and program income? So for line of credit and program income.
I looked at the webinar that Duncan referenced, and this information apparently is in report F67, the Global Finance F67, and it has the details across the top of total budget, and then grant funds dispersed and program income received and dispersed. So thank you, Duncan.
Sure. Yeah, the good thing about that that webinar that we did last year was there are still some grantees, some folks who were with NSP at the inception of the program. And DRGR has been overhauled since the beginning of the NSP program, and some of the report names and titles have changed. So that webinar was good if you're always familiar with, you know, the financial 07B report.
Right.
Well, that now has a new name under the DRGR analytics page within MicroStrategy. So, you know, that's a very helpful report, especially if you're a little long in the tooth when it comes to NSP, and
yeah.
We've got quite a ways with it. Yeah.
So yeah, it does in this the slide I'm looking at, does note and acknowledge that the notes that the F67 used to be the 7B report.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, so that's probably some updates that we need to make to the HUD exchange in terms of either updating that, you know, so feel like when you're driving down the highway and, you know, you hit exit 32, which used to be exit 3, and they put a sign up there, you know.
Yes, I experienced that firsthand when visiting Boston.
Oh, yes, indeed.
All right, so since I already highlighted the program income, the new guidance, I'm going to go ahead and highlight the other guidance, which is beneficial, is the NSP closeout crosswalk. With NSP program over the years, there's been many iterations of closeout requirements for NSP, and so HUD has essentially provided a crosswalk that highlights the most current information based on the most recent guidance, closeout guidance from Notice CPD 22-14. So this crosswalk has steps for determining your readiness for closeout, all the closeout criteria, grantee submission, what documents are required, and any changes made based on the closeout guidance CPD 22-14. HUD now allows for bulk closeouts, and step 4 is HUD review, and then post closeout requirements is outlined in step 5. The second page of the crosswalk provides additional resources that are beneficial for closing out NSP. So maybe helpful to print out this closeout crosswalk. That is hard to say. And have it as a resource available to you on your desktop or in paper form. Okay. Taking a look at the time, we have approximately 10 minutes left. Would love to answer any questions that grantees may have still. We are here to assist with your burning questions.
Jamie, should we give people a few minutes back in their day?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. So just a reminder, the closeout series and training materials is available on the HUD Exchange within the next 14 business days. If you have questions, find us on the HUD Exchange website by typing in the Neighborhood Stabilization Program page. You can contact your CPD representative, or you can email us at nsp-questions@hud.gov. And with that, I thank you everyone for attending today's office hours. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.